I'm Mrs. Liebhaeber, and I'm a retired teacher, and I taught at North School for 24 years. And I teach about what happened when Sycamore started, from about 1830 to 1860, right before the Civil War. I'm going to teach you some fun facts, and I want you to look at this poster. It says COPD, and I know it's hard to remember all the fun facts I'm going to teach you today, but if you can just remember COPD, those are the beginning letters of the fun facts I'm going to teach. This is a picture of how the pioneers traveled. They traveled in something called a covered wagon. They put all their goods and supplies in there, and it was pulled by oxen or horses or mules, and they covered it with a tarp thing called canvas, and that kept everything dry. So they had to put in to the wagon their barrels of dishes, which they stored in cornmeal to keep them from jostling and breaking. And they had to cook over open fires, so they had to bring all of their supplies, like coffee pots and tin dishes. This is a picture of what the pioneers were looking for. They were looking for three things: good, clean water. They were looking for wonderful soil, and they were also looking for terrific trees so they could build their cabins and their homes. This is Carlos Latin, Sycamore's first permanent settler. He was married to Nancy. He moved here when he was only 22 years old, and he and Nancy had 7 children. Carlos built his first log cabin in Sycamore, and this is the plaque that tells you about it. On this piece of property, Carlos Latin built the very first log cabin. So the C on our chart stands for Carlos Latin. Carlos Latin, the first settler in Sycamore. Carlos came, we think, from Orange County, New York. So when he settled Sycamore, he called this area Orange. This is the boundaries of the original town. The public square was right there in the middle. The northern boundary was Sycamore Street. The southern boundary was Ottawa. The east boundary was Walnut, and the western boundary was Somonauk. So when you're walking down the beautiful street of Somonauk and you're heading south towards Cortland, you're actually stepping along the boundary of Sycamore. And the stores that were built here were livery for horses. There was a cooper who made barrels. There were dry goods, grocery stores, butcher shops. Everything was separate. The black square shows where Sycamore was originally. Look how Sycamore has grown. All the orange area is how Sycamore has become so huge. The county seat was in Sycamore. They won the opportunity to have the courthouse because DeKalb and Sycamore had a contest of who could earn the most money. So they had bake sales and contests and donations, and Sycamore won the ability to have the county seat here. And having a courthouse makes your town kind of a big deal because it brings in a lot of business. And the courthouse was originally across the street at the American Family Insurance Company. And they have a historical marker to mention it, but that courthouse became shabby very quickly, and so they built a beautiful courthouse across the street. This was here before our library, and this is the Mansion House Hotel that Eli Barnes built in 1838. Sycamore needed a hotel for the lawyers and the judges and people who were visiting. There's our library today, built in 1905 with lots of additions since then. Beautiful, beautiful pinkish brick all over the building, and that's where the mansion house was. That's where the first hotel was. Look at this beautiful fountain. It was right in the middle of the intersection of State and Main. Gorgeous. It had water coming out of it. It was absolutely beautiful. The horses and buggies would have to go around the fountain so they didn't crash into it. And when cars were invented, it sort of became something that was in the way. The men in the town got together and they moved it to a barn outside of Sycamore. And something terrible happened. Somebody crawled into the barn at night and they stole the fountain. And to this day, we haven't found it. Plank Road was originally made of wood. It took a whole entire day for the farmers to take their grain into Geneva to sell it. Plank Road was a mess. It rotted, and some of the farmers would come at night and steal planks off the road to patch up holes in their barns. The farmers needed to have a fast and wonderful way to take their grain into Chicago. This is the train station. You probably recognize that building. And the trains went from that station south to Cortland. Cortland was called the Sycamore Spur Line. It's gone now. It's all dug up and put away. And this is what the train station looked like back then. This, boys and girls, is called a cow catcher because some of the fields weren't fenced in, so the cows would roam on the railroad tracks, and this scooted the cows off the railroad tracks so they could stay safe. Then eventually something was invented called barbed wire. Barbed wire was invented by Mr. Elwood in DeKalb, and this is wire that has sharp barbs on it. Barbed wire became very necessary until other fencing was invented. This is the original schoolhouse in Sycamore, Illinois. I'm going to show you how children dressed when they were going to school in the Central School building. They put on a little prairie bonnet. They tied it on windy days. When the sun was out, they actually put the brim down because it was not thought to be safe for ladies to have sunburn. So the little girls protected their dresses with a white apron so that mother only had to wash the apron instead of washing the whole dress. Little boys wore large brimmed hats to keep the sun off their heads while they worked hard. They also wore cotton shirts like this, and on the bottom they wore their pantaloons until they were 12. Thank you, Genevieve. I live in a one-room schoolhouse, a former one-room schoolhouse. And when we dug up our property for a septic tank, we found glass marbles, horseshoes, because the children rode horses to get to the schools in the country. This is how Somonauk Street looked. Before they invented gravel, the street was a muddy mess. Tires on the wagons would kick up mud on the ladies in their beautiful clothing. And the gentleman was always supposed to walk on the outside, the closest part to the street, so that he could protect the ladies' clothing. These are hitching posts to tie up your horse when you were going to visit. The reason this house is special is because Jesse Kellogg was a very good man. He became the first postmaster, the first DeKalb County clerk, and he helped slaves escape during the Civil War to Canada. Now, slaves were people who were purchased Well, Abraham Lincoln came along and said, oh, no, 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 no. No man should work for somebody else unless he's being paid. And Jesse Kellogg agreed with Abraham Lincoln. So Abraham Lincoln sat in the White House and wrote down, no man should work for another man without being paid. The South was mad because they were losing their slaves. So the slaves escaped, and it wasn't really a railroad, it was just hiding places they could hide in Jesse's basement and all along the road to Canada. So Jesse would say, come on in. And his wife would heat up some water, and the children and the parents could take a nice warm bath and get a wonderful meal. And then Jesse would put them in his wagon, put a little corn on top of them, a little blanket and some straw, and he'd take them to the next house on the Underground Railroad. He was a hero. The last one here is the letter D. When the Potawatomi Indians saw that people were traveling further west, they said, before you go, if you dip your feet in the Kishwaukee River, you will always return to Sycamore. So I want you to remember these fun facts. COPD, Carlos Latin. Sycamore Courthouse started out across the street from where it is now. Carlos Latin named it Orange, and then it was changed to Sycamore. Plank Road used to be made of wood. And if you dip your feet in the Kishwaukee River, you will always come back to Sycamore. Now remember, boys and girls, Sycamore history is important because you live here, and it's fascinating. History teaches us hope. History is a word that means studying about the past. And if we have hope in our hearts and we can learn about the past, we can try not to repeat the mistakes other people have made. And history teaches us what other people did and learned so we can learn from them.